All right, let's learn a little bit more about this nefarious character, Marcel Duchamp, and how he flipped the art world upside down. First thing you need to know about Marcel Duchamp is that he was actually a classically trained artist. He was born in France, which, as we know, was a good place to be if you wanted to be a painter. He was born to a family of artists, but being that he was starting his career in the later part of the 19th century, he was very aware of the changes that were happening in art. So a lot of his work already looked very much like the realist paintings, sort of like this portrait that's on the right over here of his father. And they also looked impressionistic, like the portrait that the landscape that's on the left. That looks sort of like a Monet landscape. So he was sort of dabbling in all of the different art trends that were happening, sort of feeling out what his style was. Um, and however, if you're a history buff, you know that in 1914, um, there were some major changes happening in the world. That was the beginning of World War One. And if you were alive during World War One, imagine, would you rather be living in Europe or would you rather live in the United States? Marcel Duchamp wanted to get the heck out of Paris, so he actually came over to New York. He deliberately chose New York City because of its flourishing art scene. Um, he felt that New York City was where the 20th century was really happening. It didn't have a stuffy art academy, and in fact, its art scene was very progressive. I like to think of the early New York art scene as sort of like the hippies of the art world. They were very accepting of everything. They were like, dude, everything can be art. And he wanted to be a part of that. So, as he arrived in New York City, he knew that he had really found his home. He saw this Flatiron building, which is a really famous piece of architecture in New York City. And that's when he really felt like he was in the right place because this building that he'd always admired from postcards was now in his own backyard. So he made himself at home, and he made himself at home at this Society of Independent Artists, which was a group of artists who put on art shows from time to time. And he became sort of a board member, somebody who was in charge at this society. And every year, the Society of Independent Artists put on an exhibition. Sounds a little bit like a salon, an annual exhibition. However, it's very different from the salon. In the French salons, people had to be invited to show their artwork. But at these exhibitions for the Society of Independent Artists, anybody was allowed to show their artwork. All you had to do was submit your artwork with a $5 fee. So as long as you just submitted your artwork and the fee, they would put your artwork in the art show. And Marcel Duchamp was sort of doing like an undercover boss thing because he was in charge of this society or one of the people in charge. He was wondering to what extent would they really allow anything. So he went back to his apartment and he started playing around with some of the little gadgets he had put together. This bicycle wheel attached to a stool was not supposed to be some sort of like art object. This is like the world's first fidget spinner. And Marcel Duchamp had put this together in his apartment. And he would sit there and sort of like meditate on it while it would be spinning. So while he's thinking about this whole idea of anything can be art and, his Society of Independent Artists is going to accept everybody's art, he's spinning this wheel and really meditating on that idea. Can anything be art? Is there really nothing so absurd that they will reject it? So he decides to do, like I said, like an undercover boss experiment. And he goes out on sort of like the New York City Market Street and is searching for this absurd thing that he can submit to the exhibition anonymously. Now, granted, his two friends who are shopping with him, they know what's going on, but they've pretty much sworn that they're not going to tell anybody. So the three of them set out, this crazy French man and the two New Yorkers, and they're shopping along these storefronts, and he gets to a storefront that is actually for a place that sells commercial toilets. It's a place where if you have a business, you could go buy the toilets that you're going to put in your business. And he sees a urinal. It's a Bedfordshire urinal. And as he looks at it through the storefront, he kind of beelines into the store, and his friends have no idea what he's doing. They wait for him outside of the store, and moments later, Marcel Duchamp walks out hauling this rather heavy porcelain urinal, says nothing about it, and just hails a taxi cab, and the three of them set on back to their apartments. His friends just kind of look at him and think, Duchamp, you're crazy, man, but I'm sure you've got something great up your sleeves. So what Marcel Duchamp does is he takes it back to his apartment and again sort of like meditates on it. And he decides to just leave it on its side. It's sturdy that way. Also, by turning it on its side, it makes it not functional. Because the part that you see sitting on the pedestal there, that would be the part, if it was a urinal, it would have to be on the wall in order to be able to use it. So by putting it outside, it's no longer functional as a urinal. And by putting it in an art gallery and having it on its side, perhaps he can elevate this into the world of art. Sort of like how Manet took that working lady and elevated her, so she almost had this sort of goddess-like status. Art has the ability to free objects in people from their regular lives and turn them into something else. And that's sort of what Duchamp wanted to prove here. So he took this urinal and he turned it aside and he signed it with a fake name. Notice in the bottom left corner it says R. Mutt, 1917. R. Mutt does not stand for Marcel Duchamp, but he wanted to use a fake name so that way he could see the reaction of his friends at the Society of Independent Artists as they unpackage this when they're putting the exhibition together. And like I said, it's like an undercover boss thing. He wants to make sure that his friends really could possibly bend their brains around this to see the artistic merit. Unfortunately, they did not. So they get to the day where they're unpackaging all of the entries, collecting all the fees, which I will say, Mr. R. Mutt did submit his $5, so his urinal should have been on display. But sadly, Marcel Duchamp found that his colleagues were outraged. They were so outraged and they were sort of beside themselves. They didn't know what to do with the urinal. So they just sort of set it aside. And then the next day, poof, the urinal had disappeared. Nobody knows where the original urinal is. All we have left is this photograph of the original urinal. Some think that one of his colleagues actually destroyed it in the middle of the night. So perhaps its fragments are in a landfill somewhere. Nobody's really quite sure where the original one. It just disappeared. So Marcel Duchamp was actually quite outraged by this. He realized that his colleagues were not deep thinkers. They were not willing to give Mr. R. Mutt a chance to figure out what this urinal was all about. And so he went to his friend Alfred Stieglitz, and Alfred Stieglitz is actually the one who took this photograph. Marcel Duchamp knew very well that his friends might not be receptive of the urinal as Fountain is its title, Fountain as a piece of artwork. So he wanted to make sure that it was photographed before it was actually submitted to the art show. And that was a smart move because, like I said, now the photograph is the only thing we have left. So Alfred Stieglitz ended up publishing the photograph, and he wrote a defense here for Richard Mutt, R. Mutt. And the article goes on to talk about what a shame it is that the Society of Independent Artists said that they would put everything on display that was submitted, but poor Richard Mutt did not get his urinal displayed. And the thing about Alfred Stieglitz is he's a really, really famous artist. He owned his own gallery. He was a photographer. He was a really well respected person in the art community. So when he came out and started to defend this mysterious R. Mutt character, people started to scratch their heads and they thought, oh my gosh, have we missed something? Um, and so this huge controversy ensued. There were people who became very defensive of Richard Mutt, and they said, absolutely, there is artistic merit in this urinal. And people started to call it like a porcelain Buddha, because if you look at the outline of it sitting here, it sort of looks like the outline of a sitting Buddha. But then there are people who are very offended by it. I mean, it is a toilet, people. And so there's a lot of people who still stand by the fact that it is not a work of art, but perhaps it's a little bit more of a joke. And really, the controversy has never really ended. People aren't really sure if Marcel Duchamp was really serious about the urinal. Was he trying to prove a point? Was he trying to make some sort of grand statement about how the world, which was at the time at war, folks, was it like a useless toilet? Perhaps. Or was it just a joke? Was it something really so absurd that he just wanted us to have a conversation about it? The thing is, Marcel Duchamp was a bit of a jokester. Down here, let me get rid of this here. At the bottom of the, oh, dang it. Let's go. Okay, sorry. So at the bottom of this Mona Lisa poster, Marcel Duchamp wrote LHOOQ, which doesn't really mean anything, but it does if you say the letters in French, LHOOQ, they sound like the words that also sound, they sound like the French words for she has a hot butt. So he took the poster of this world's most famous painting and scribbled a little goatee and mustache on her, and then says she's got a hot butt. That sounds like a pretty classic junior high pranky joke. So that is very much the mentality that Marcel Duchamp had. But he's also a deep thinker. He's such a deep thinker that actually, after being really ticked off about the whole fountain issue, he quit the art world. He stopped making art altogether. And he just said, you know what? If I want to be an artist, I'm going to do it underground. I'm not going to do it in a place where I have to worry about how people are going to receive my artwork. I'll just do what I want, and nobody else is going to enjoy my art. I'm just going to enjoy my art. So instead, to make money, he ended up playing chess for the rest of his life. So if you ever look up on YouTube, Marcel Duchamp, most of the videos you find of him are of him playing chess. So he's a brilliant guy, but also he has a sense of humor. In fact, speaking of sense of humor, here you go. There's a little Duchamp joke for you. Duchamp was here. The thing is, decades have passed since this whole urinal debacle, and there are 13 existing copies of the original urinal. Because when Marcel Duchamp realized that the first one disappeared, he said, you know what? You can kill the object, but you can't kill the idea. So he went right back to the exact same potty store where he purchased the first one, and he bought 13 more copies, signed them all, R. Mutt, 1917. In fact, just like I am here, you can go to the Philadelphia Art Museum where they have a huge collection of Duchamp work. And you can see one of those original 13 copies. And also, they have the bicycle wheel and stool that he liked to meditate on, too. And here's another view of part of their collection. So I told you that Marcel Duchamp said that he wanted to go underground to do his artwork. And to see the proof of this, you would have to go to the Philadelphia Art Museum to do exactly what I'm doing in this picture here. He left this huge installation to the Philadelphia Art Museum after he died. He worked on this thing for 20 years in his own apartment, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, because if you were really curious enough, like I was, you would have to go on a pilgrimage to kind of see what lies behind this big, thick wooden door. But he left it for us. In fact, that is the title of it. It has been given. Um, and he didn't want anybody to profit from it. And so he purchased the room in which it now resides. And to see it, you have to go to the Philadelphia Art Museum. It is really interesting. That's all I'll say about that. Okay, so here's our urinal again. So, quick recap. Marcel Duchamp produced this. Well, he didn't produce it. He didn't make it. He just bought it. But presented the art world with this urinal. And by doing so, he started a conversation about what is art. And eventually, art historians have come around to suggest that this is one of the most influential pieces of the 20th century. It is the most influential piece of the 20th century, and that art wouldn't look the way it is today without this urinal because of the conversation that it started. And what Marcel Duchamp did with this is he freed artists from their medium. Before this urinal, people had to if you wanted to be an artist, you had to consider yourself either a painter or a sculptor. And he allowed artists just to be artists with this urinal. If you have an idea, you can use anything as an artist that you need to convey that idea. So if you need to buy a urinal to sell your idea, then that's what you need to do. If you need to sit in a chair for 3 months to sell your idea, then that's what you need to do. Art is no longer about just craftsmanship. It is about ideas. So now there's this modern art challenge. If anything can be art, how can artists still make names for themselves? That is challenging. And it becomes more challenging as time goes on. And that's simply because as people take an idea, that's just one more thing that you can't do to make a name for yourself. But there are ways that artists have made names for themselves. If you're putting it in your own words, think about this. Classical art was hard because it's not easy to sit down at a piece of marble and make it look like human flesh. It's not easy to sit down with oil paints and a canvas and make it look like deep space. Classical art was hard because of the craftsmanship part of it. It wasn't hard to think about what you were going to make in the classical era, because you only had so many subjects you could choose from. You could open up the Bible and pick your favorite Bible story and you could paint that. You could paint your favorite emperor or president, or prime minister, but you couldn't just sit down and paint whatever you wanted. Now you can paint or sculpt or buy urinals for whatever purpose you want. The important thing is to have an idea. The important thing is to come up with something new and to have some sort of conversation in your artwork about something. And that is what interests people in modern art. It's the idea behind it. So the craftsmanship part was challenging in classical art, but the idea part is really hard in modern art. So in the next part, we'll go through very quickly, some of the art movements that responded to this, because art historians were really nervous that if anything can be art, nothing new can be done. But artists are creative people, and they will certainly always find some new things to be done. So we'll discuss that in the next section.